season. This Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, where we begin into our Lent season, and this next week we'll begin a brand new teaching series that will lead us up to Easter. I'm excited about that. Hopefully you are too. Let's jump right into our text for today. If you have your worship guides from Sunday, you will know that today is Genesis chapter 9, verses 9 through 17. And we're in the story of Noah and the covenant that God made with him. Real quick, if you don't know the story of Noah, you know that the earth had become so corrupt, that people had become so sinful and corrupt, that God searched the earth and could only find one man, that is Noah, who was righteous enough to save. And so God decides to judge the earth through a flood. And the flood comes and wipes out all living things except for all living things that breathe air, except for the animals. As you know the story, the kid's story, 2 by 2 they came in, and God tells Noah to build an ark and saves all of the air-breathing animals, including him and his family and his sons and their family. And they go onto the ark, and it floods, and everyone is wiped out. It's kind of we like to put the story of Noah on our nursery walls and read the books, but it's kind of a fairy tale as a child, but it's really a terrible thing and shows the deep effects of sin in our life and what God thinks of that. But our sin, and that's kind of the point, is the story of Noah tells us that sin had reached this point of no return, and God had no other option but to judge. But God wasn't done with us. God wasn't done with his creation. He still saw hope, and he saw that through the person of Noah. And so the story of Noah speaks to us really about the seriousness of sin and how serious if God would wipe out all living things because of sin and try to start over, that speaks to the seriousness of sin, but it also speaks to God's actions to resolve that problem. That God, like I said, doesn't just wash his hands of us, but God sees an opportunity to renew, to revive, to create a new through his actions in the world. And we'll later see that in the person of Jesus. So Noah is all about covenant. It's all about this covenant, and the story of Noah is about God's covenant with people and his creation. Covenant was this widespread custom that they did in the Near East, in the Greco-Roman world. There's a lot of different ideas and definitions that people have come up with, what a covenant was, what it meant to them. A covenant was sort of like a contract, but it was very different. It was an agreement between two people, but where a contract would be created, people would enter into a business contract. It was created more under the guise of distrust. I don't trust you. You don't trust me. Let's have this contract with what might happen. We'll keep up my end of the bargain. You keep up your end of the bargain. And if one of us doesn't, then there'll be consequences, right? And that is a contract. And we still have contracts today. But contracts are created out of a distrust between two people or two parties. But covenants are more of a covenant is more of a sacred bond, if you will, of kinship. It's built more out of trust, out of an agreement that I will be with you and you be with me, and I'll keep my end of the bargain and you keep your end of the bargain, but we will continue to have this relationship, this kinship. That is, it's kind of like a marriage. Marriage is more of a covenant than a contract. There's no expectations except that the kinship and the obedience to one another would stay there. So you have this idea of covenant in the book of Genesis, in the story of Noah in Genesis chapter 9. There are different kinds of covenants. Noah's is a divine covenant. There are 3 divine covenants in the book of Genesis. There's the covenant between Adam and Eve, which is in their marriage, so to say. That is a divine covenant that we see, and we know that was broken, and God provided a way through that. We also see the covenant between Noah and God with Noah's family and those who would come after him. That was more of a domestic covenant that God was renewing his commitment to us. And then you have the covenant of Abraham, and we know that was the beginning of God's salvation story. Shouldn't say the beginning. It's part of the salvation history. But at every pinnacle of salvation history, at every historical moment where God intervened and showed his way, is a covenant. A covenant with Adam and Eve, a covenant with Noah, a covenant with Abraham. Later we'll see there's a covenant with David, and then that is comes to full fruition in the person of Jesus, who instituted the new covenant. Not the covenant as in Old Testament, New Testament, but the covenant as God's sacred divine kinship with us and his commitment to that. So in Genesis chapter 9, verse 9 through 17, we see this importance of covenant, the importance of God. And the way we see that is in the way the author kind of beats a drum of what I call the between yous and me's. There's like a drum beat that you see in this chapter of covenant between God and Noah and creation and all of us who will benefit after this. So if you will, in chapter 9, Genesis chapter 9, we'll just start reading. Then God told Noah and his sons, I hereby confirm my covenant with you and your descendants, and with all the animals that were on the boat with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, every living creature. Yes, I am confirming my covenant with you. He's confirming that. God is saying, I am confirming that what I started, I will finish. What I created, I will keep. What I promised, I will keep. Never again will floodwaters kill all living creatures. Never again will a flood destroy the earth. And then we get into this drumbeat of covenant. So then God said, I am giving you a sign of my covenant with you and with all living things for all generation. There it is. I am giving you a sign of my covenant between you and me and all living creatures, right? And we can go to a little different version of that. I am making between me and you and every living creature with you. So there's that between. So that's verse 12. Verse 13, I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. So now God is covenanting not only with us, but also with his creation. And that should speak to the importance of creation to us. Skip down to verse 15. I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the floodwaters destroy life. So then verse 15, we see that again, another drum beat. It's like making a covenant, boom, between me and you. Making a covenant in verse 13, boom, between me and all the earth. Verse 15, I remember my covenant, boom, between me and you and all living creatures. So there's this drumbeat happening, this between you and me and creation and all of that. In verse 16, he says, whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures and of every kind on the earth. And then in verse 17, so God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life and earth. So you see, covenant is this sacred kinship, committed kinship between two people. And here's the thing that I think this says for us today. What does this mean to me? Because I'm not Noah, right? But God wasn't just making this with Noah. He was making it between Noah, between the earth, between all living creatures, and between all future generations. God continued his continued concern and activity in our world and all of his creation shows us this rock solid, this unstoppable, this unshakable, this immovable love that God has for us. This is our God. This is a God who never gives up on us, who never will walk away from us, who will never just throw away what he has created. Instead, he makes a covenant and he upholds that covenant. And we see that as we see in this Lent season, as we move toward the cross and resurrection, we see that God continues to make a way. Even when we are breaking the covenant, even when we are sinful, God is faithful. And for those of us who put our hope and faith in that, we too are made righteous through that covenant, through the person of Jesus Christ. And we'll talk more about that down the road. But Noah, today, I think for us the big takeaway is that God just will never give up on us. His covenant, his promises, he will keep them even when we can't. So I hope that helps you today. God bless. Stay safe. A lot of snow coming today if you have to be out and about.